welcome to the Pat Life Podcast. As always, I am Patrick, and today I have with us the legend. Everybody knows who we're talking with today, Mr. Topher Gardner. Man, what's going on, man?
How's it going, Pat? How's Hawaii treating you?
Dude, honestly, man, I've gotten texts from people about like, dude, is it really as bad as they say? And I haven't noticed anything, dude. It's pretty chill. I
What do you
mean,
mean really as bad? Like what's supposedly happening?
well, some people, have listened to the recent podcast on Crow with the gentleman who was in Costa Rica or in Hawaii, and he was just saying about like the hardships they had earlier on with all the lockdowns and all the craziness, but but it hasn't been like that here at all. Like I mean now at least, and they've been slowly trying to enforce stuff like little by little, but it's more like now they're like openly like, hey, can you kind of like try to put this back on, and or can you kind of like try to do these things where it's not like a this you have to do these things. They're now really like kind of like it would be greatly appreciated, and like no, I mean nobody, everyone's really chill. So it's I've gotten texts from people being like, hey man, I hope everything's good there. I'm like, yeah, I'm at the grocery store. What's up? So it's really not, it hasn't been anything crazy, man, but it's good weather. Um, my son's crushing. He's loving it. He was a little sick this last week, but we've been having fun, man. Just living life, getting out in nature, exploring. So a lot of good stuff on my end. How about you? How's life now in Missouri?
Well, I'm in northern Arkansas, so
Oh, that's right.
I'm right in the Missouri border, but it's wonderful. Like
Yeah,
gardening here has really opened my eyes to like the insanity of what I was trying to do in Costa Rica from a gardening perspective. Because
so
I had a bunch of people that knew a lot more about permaculture and just agriculture in general in Costa Rica, and they were saying how the tropics was actually a very hard place to grow things. Because like
absolutely.
if it was left to its own devices, it would be a canopy rainforest. So trying to grow things in the ground is actually kind of asinine.
Totally.
And that never registered because I didn't ever have anything to compare it to. And here, like all my tomatoes and cucumbers and like all of it is just like beautiful, like the vibrance from it. And I was like, oh, now I finally understand what they were saying.
Totally, man. So is it? I mean, obviously, rainforest is a completely. We're talking zones and everything like that. You're really jumping zones from here in Arkansas. But like, what for you is it more of just? I guess is it more you have more control, or you can determine or dictate kind of the soil content that you're dealing with, the amount of water and everything else, and there's not as many curveballs. I guess would you say that there's something in that regard, or is it more of just
That area where I was in Central America, if humans weren't there, the way the forest would grow there, you'd have all these huge trees creating a canopy.
hmm
And they get their nutrition not from the soil. They get their nutrition from the mist, the ocean mist. Because like Costa Rica is a very small, narrow
right,
country in between two massive saltwater bodies.
right,
And so as I understood what they were talking about with the rainforest is like, the oceans bathe all the trees with all their micro minerals in the rain.
right?
And then all of the carbon is up in the tree.
Gotcha.
And like you could see, like a lot of the root bases of many of these massive trees are on the surface of the tree, on the surface of the soil. They don't
hmm
go down.
Right, right.
And what I'm noticing the difference here, especially because I'm taking out stumps, the old owner had cut down a bunch of trees and left stumps. The oak forest that's here, I live amidst a lot of oak and hickory and
hmm
walnut trees and stuff like that. The root bases they shoot down,
Right.
and there's a lot more carbon actually in the ground. So my company, one of my companies that I had in Costa Rica was making biochar. And it was mainly because in the tropics, technically there's not carbon in the ground.
Right.
and,
It's in the
and,
pie.
you need carbon to grow the things that we like to eat. And here I'm just finding it's a lot easier. Like the soil here has more carbon in it. So you have a much higher mycelial growth, through the soil. Like in the tropics, you obviously have mycelium that will go on top of rotting trees and help the rotting process occur. But as far as I understand it, the soil, when you have a lot of carbon in the soil, then you end up having these mycelial pathways that are all in the ground, in the terra firma.
Right.
And I did raise beds here and things like that to protect it from the wildlife here. Because, once you start growing anything delicious, the critters come out to eat it.
Yeah.
So I do have raised beds. It's not like, other than my corn, everything is in a bed.
Yeah.
And I did do the biochar stuff. I do the water, like I take the Brown's gas water, the protein water, and I give that to the plants probably 4 or 5 times a week. We do the urine. We do all like the bodily secretion stuff just to inform the plants, what it is, what we're going through.
Well, real quick, for those who maybe don't know, what do you mean by adding the urine aspect?
So your urine is your blood plasma. So your blood plasma has lots of your blood cells in it, and plants are extremely intelligent. They're like a really good lap dog. The dog wants to give you what it is that you want. You're the master to it. And so the plants are very much wanting to give you what you need. So they transduce the solar energy, and they transduce that into all the, I guess you'd say, micro and macronutrients that your body needs. But they need to know what you need. And one of the easiest ways to do that, there's 2 ways that I was exposed to with all the biodynamic people I knew. One of the ways was like, if you're starting from seed, you put the seed in your mouth and you let your saliva actually inform the seed. And now it's kind of cool because I just did some hormone testing, and the doctor that does the hormone testing, she actually says it's much better to do the saliva-based hormone testing than doing the blood-based hormone testing. Because whenever you're doing just the blood-based hormone testing, you're essentially just being informed by what's happening in the liver. You're actually not being informed by the whole system. Well, maybe this is conjecture here. I don't know. My guess would be that the seed itself will take your hormone profile and go, okay, this guy is, low on this, and this. So as long as you're structuring the soil with good carbon, with pyrolyzed carbon, and you're structuring the water that you give it, that gives the plant enough. And then you've told the plant what it is that you need, then the plant will grow in harmony with that. Nature's always wanting to be symbiotic with us. It's very interactive.
I couldn't agree more. And that I'm aware of like the urine aspect of it for sure. But I didn't know about like the putting it like in your mouth approach to farming and to planting and seed and growing seed. Now, if it's say like it's a plant that or a fruit, vegetable, whatever that doesn't have like, say you're lacking potassium, do they know, or have they been able to study that when people do this, like if it's a low kind of potassium fruit or vegetable, that they've seen an increase in the amount of potassium within that vegetable or within that fruit? Is that how it works, or is it more of just kind of the entire garden kind of symbiosis being like, all right, he just gave us his saliva, we need more potassium, where are you, certain fruit, you know what I mean, where are you, certain vegetable?
I haven't seen any direct studies like that. What I have seen is that the people that have practiced this, their overall health gets much, much better.
Right.
So it's sort of like, just from what I've seen, I'm not saying that doesn't exist,
Right.
But like from an anecdotal perspective, whenever they've actually tested their biology after doing this,
I see.
they're in more harm, like they're in a much more higher harmonic state.
Right.
And there's tons of evidence of that. And two, hey, maybe it's placebo. I don't care. Either way, what's occurring in my consciousness is that I'm informing, I'm giving a really starting a love bond with these organisms, these plants, and all the bacteria that informs them. And I'm letting them know, hey, I'm here for you. And then they reciprocate. They go, I'm here for you too. And it works out.
I think that's 100% on the head. And this, is always one of the reasons why I love having you on, is because I love talking and picking your brain about the human potential. I love picking your brain about understanding this harmony between, us as men and women and nature, and understanding, as you just said, this is a symbiosis relationship, and it's just understanding what is that relationship, right? And I always, as you were saying earlier about like the plants and the seeds and taking your information, and but like they need to know what you want. Like it just made me think of that meme or whatever, that scene from The Notebook when he's like, "What do you want?" She's like, "I don't know." He's like, "What do you want?" Like just constantly being like, "Just fucking tell me." And it's like, I'm complicated. It's like, holy shit. Like, that's what it makes me think of.
Well,
But
they're not actually asking you what you want. They're actually being seen what you need. Most of the
right,
time, what we need and what we want are not
right.
in lockstep.
Right, yeah, but yeah, ultimately, what I think is important for at least everyone listening is knowing that there is that symbiotic relationship, and as you said, as much as we are men and we might think we're smart, nature is always smarter. Nature, as you said, knows what you will need. It knows what your body needs in order to thrive. And I don't know if you know Tommy John, but he's a spark plug in the fitness world, and he talks a lot about always, we are the biggest obstacle to our healing. We will always be the biggest obstacle to our healing. We're always getting in the way. We're never, a lot of times we're not listening to what nature is providing. We think we have it all figured out, and nature's like, dumb, I know what's right. You keep making it worse. So anyway, and we could talk about stuff like that later. But while we're on the farming stuff, you really quick, you made a post this morning, or at least I think it was this morning, about this electro culture that seemed pretty interesting. So maybe can you describe that a little bit more? Because I saw that and I was like,
Always been devices, let's just say the last century and a half, where if you create a conductive current in your garden, either through actually, putting an electrical current on a wire to due north or due east, depending on what it is that you're trying to create, and or use magnets to induce a current, or use the southern pole of magnets to actually cure your seeds, you end up having a much higher yield. So I'm a very lazy person. So when I hear these things, I'm like, oh, I can do a little bit of this and receive a lot more on the other side. Like I'll get a higher yield on my investment. I get really excited about it. And so this is my first time doing it with these specific I've been creating these magnetic arrays for a water purifier that I'm bringing to market. And then a friend of mine shared with me this whole electroculture. He was the guy I was telling you about that invented the different orgone accumulators that I used to sell, the Mojo cell. But he 3D printed me these domes so I could put the magnet array in the dome. And I was like, this will fit perfectly over my potato spuds. And so I'm giving it a whirl. I'm going to see if that works. I've been around a lot of farms that use the term radionics, where they actually broadcast a signal in the scalar domain. It creates a standing columnar wave to their farm. And what that does is it infuses everything that's growing with essentially an abundance program, like because right now in the environment that we live in, we're being constantly bombarded with all different types of toxicity, whether it's electromagnetic or it's natural chemical. So when you add these types of things to your farm, it allows your farm, first of all, it informs your environment once again that you're aware of these threats. Two, that you're here for the farm, like you're here as the steward of the land, and I'm going to add this field effect to actually induce a higher qualitative aspect to the land. And I was first exposed to this through Victor Schauberger's work. Victor Schauberger, he was big about like actually creating an egg and putting the egg, a third of the egg or 2/3 of the egg into the ground, and then the top third of the egg outside of the ground. So you'd have like a hemispherical dome exposed to the earth, and then you'd have more of the what's known as a lancet arch dome in the ground. And then you'd fill that with water, a structured water that had, you'd throw gold in there, nickel, whatever you found that you needed the land to have. And that dome would act as an emitter for up to 10 kilometers, infusing this, for lack of a better word, a homeopathic dose of all those things that are in it to all the plants.
Whoa.
Yeah, and animals. And they did this all throughout Austria. It was like the yields of the farmers that were doing it were really high. And the first farm I lived on in Costa Rica, the owner was really big into Schauberger. He actually turned me on to Schauberger. And he had one of these eggs in the middle of one of his greenhouses. And he also had a water structure and a spiral water structure and all that stuff. And so I got really turned on to all that stuff, because he had actually really good yields on his farm, like much better yields than a lot of other farms that I saw. And it wasn't like he was tending to his garden all the time either. Right. It was just like, he had consistent volunteer help that would help here and there, but it was mostly guys like me that knew nothing about agriculture.
Right.
And so when I saw the results of it, and then in studying Schauberger, I got into, well, how is it a shape like that can actually induce a qualitative effect, at a distance? And I'd already been exposed to homeopathy and channeling and like bilocation. So it wasn't a complete alien effect to me to know that consciousness isn't like isolated to a certain space and time.
Right.
And so all that technology just made a lot of sense to me. And so I ended up falling in love with domes because of the egg shape and the geometry that's in an egg, in the flow forms. And I really wanted my whole, entree into construction was to actually build egg-shaped water tanks. Because my vision, even to this day, is to pepper the landscape with these beautiful egg-shaped water tanks. And then it was really kind of cool because where we lived, they had all these water tanks, like they called them asadas on the mountainsides. So you'd have a spring, and the spring would dump water into essentially a big concrete box. And then the second farm I moved to had one of these massive concrete boxes on the side, on the property. I remember one day we had to go clean it. Like they drained it, and then we had to clean it and resurface the inside of it. And everything that Schauberger talked about, I got to see firsthand. So I jump into this like sarcophagus of water entombment, and like all the corners, like all the 90-degree angle corners of it were just disgusting. Like the amount of fungus and whatever the growths were, they all accumulated in the corners.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my goodness, just to change the water storage habits of people. Because, you know, if they're like, hey, concrete block, it's reliable, it's inexpensive, it's, you know, bulletproof, we'll just build a box and we'll store the water in there. Well, after years and years and years of that, they had to start adding all these chemicals to this one wonderful spring water, because what they're actually storing the water in is creating this detrimental effect to the water. So yeah, I got into building domes so I could actually store water effectively.
And that's why it's super fascinating to me, because it just shows you how it's all interconnected. We could be talking about, you know, gardening, it all pertains. We could be talking about, you know, training, my, you know, fitness stuff, it all pertains. And it just really lets you, you know, for those listening, a lot of them already tapped in and get it, but a lot of people who aren't listening, it's going, wait a minute, this all starts to flow into one big symbiosis that we're talking about here. And it's like, yeah, exactly. And you know, funny enough, you know, when you know you're on the right path, I was just listening to you and Owen's last stream about how, like, when people are tapped in, now we're like really tapped in. You know, you're saying there's that shift happening, right? So I was before all this craziness, I got brought on to Shawburger by a friend of my fiance, who's a buddy of mine, but he brought it into my field and like put me down a rabbit hole. Not even as far as much as what you're talking about, but just seeing and studying some of the things that he was putting out there, and you're realizing, like, all right, let me just now observe this in my everyday life. And you start looking around, you going, holy shit, oh wow, this is everywhere. You know what I mean? And you realize, you know, it just opens your mind to so much more, and it takes you down all these rabbit holes. And now you're talking about creating these egg-shaped domes that's emitting this homeopathic, you know, pulse. And you realize that, like, oh, that's not just woo-woo made up stuff. Like, this is real deal. Like, it is what drives all of this. And it just makes me get excited, because then it makes you, okay, well, where else can then, as I said, where can this be, you know, kind of produced and translated? And which brings me to something, actually, again, you and Owen were talking about the other day about sleep, and talking about weight, and this kind of pertains to training as well. So you were saying, for those who didn't listen, both you guys were talking about trying to get into shape, trying to get off some of that dad bod, and maybe just kind of describing the conversation from your point of view, because there's some things I wanted to kind of bring to your field and maybe into your attention about it.
Oh, good. Thank you. I need all the help. I need all the help I can get. So for the last 2.5 years, my sleep cycle on average has been interrupted about 45 times a night. And I was always a very light sleeper. Mm-hmm. And so in my younger life, I actually would choose girlfriends, specifically girlfriends that didn't move around a lot once they fell asleep. Because I'm such a light sleeper. Like, the second somebody moves, I'm awake. And my wife and I, we ended up becoming like continuum parents, not by chance. It's just our little girl is such a snuggle muffin. Mm-hmm. So my sleep cycle is just interrupted all the time. And I've noticed all the intermittent fasting, all the different things I used to do that really kept me in a balanced state, like kept me strong and focused with no brain fog. None of that stuff works right now. And so I was starting to think, oh, maybe it's just a function of age. Maybe it's just this or that. And that's all part of it. But the main thing was, I had a friend of mine that she was like, well, what's your sleep cycle like? And I was like, oh, well, yeah, you know, I'm a young dad. Like, that's just what you do. Like, I have this aspect of my consciousness, just like grin and bear it. Like, right. So what, you know? And she brought to my attention, like, just the effect of having, you know, interrupted sleep, like what that actually does to your hormones. Right. And I was like, well, this makes sense, because my visceral fat is at a point where, like, my diet's not affecting my viscera. Mm-hmm. And back in the day, if I went keto for like a few days in a row, like my visceral fat would just immediately convert from like the white to the brown.
Right.
And my ghrelin would kick back in. I could go to 1 meal a day, like I've been on the biohacking tip for like 12 years. So like I was actually training people in this, like I'm very well educated in it. But the one thing I forgot was the sleep,
Right.
side of it. And then also a lot of stress with moving countries and running businesses in 2 separate countries and, the whole thing with that. So the stress aspect of my life plus the lack of sleep, and I should say a lack of quality sleep. Really, those 2 things combined pretty much changed a lot of my hormonal makeup. And so right now I'm just moving back to neutral with that, getting that back on par.
For sure. Yeah, no, because once you guys start talking about it, this is actually from my background is something I've thought for so long. And let me kind of give some backstory. So as a young trainer, you get people come in, and a lot of those people are parents. And before I was a parent, they would go, "Hey man, these are my goals. This is what I want to do. This is how I want to look and I want to feel." And I'd be like, "Okay, once again, what is your sleep like?" "Yeah, it's a little bit off. I've kids and they're waking up in the middle of the night. I have deadlines." And then, my mind is like, I know what I've been told. Hey, you should get proper sleep. Here's why. Like you said, you got your circadian rhythms, you have your REM, you have, your deep states, all that, as I said, the REM, you have, all these functions that, you need when you're sleeping. And people are like, yeah, no, I totally get it. But it's like, they come back a week later. It's like, my kid was up last night. My kid was sick. I had, one was crying, and you're like, okay, well, I can't tell this person not to tend to their children. And you start thinking, and it made me start thinking, it's going, well, okay, hold on a second. Yes, there's no question about it that sleep's important. But then it made me start to go, as I went on my journey of like, look at nature. And I look at my dog. And we have a dog. And if I pop up, she pops up. She's wide awake. And then she goes about, she might walk around, she comes back, she sleeps. And I'm like sitting there and I'm watching it. And I'm going, wait a minute. My dog's pretty chill all day. But then my dog wakes up in the middle of the night, probably like a couple times. And if I wake up once, twice, she's wide awake. And I'm just like, started thinking about it. I'm like, okay, well, we see friends who have animals and things. If there's any threat, they have to be quick to wake up. Especially if you're out in nature. You know what I'm saying? Like there's this mindset where I'm going, well, if I actually look out in nature, there is a quick response for waking up. There's a tending to the offspring, whatever it may be. There's that, stress response, something coming in, and there's a quick response to wake up. But the difference is for a lot of us is that being able to go right back to bed. And so it just, for me, that's one component of it that I'm just going, is it a matter of, and then this is just a question, is it a matter of actually waking up a bunch of times? Or is it a matter of, like you said, underlying stress responses, underlying things that, as you said, moving countries, all these other thoughts that keep us almost waking up, rather than kind of like animals in nature, when they have a fear response, they shake it off and then they're back to just living their life. It's this ability, capacity to go from this, sympathetic back to parasympathetic. You know what I'm saying? Like, so this is just one component, but go on.
As far as I understand it, humans are much different than most animals because 25% of our energy goes to our brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the same way for other animals.
Right.
Our prefrontal cortex, if we're using it, consumes, like relative to the weight of the brain, consumes a vast amount of our energy.
Mm-hmm.
So the stress response in me, with all the different things of being a new father, moving countries, less sleep, like all the different stresses out there, increased very specific hormones in my body that essentially destroyed my gut bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
Then it becomes a positive feedback loop, not positive as in good, but the positive feedback loop then is, now that my gut chemistry has changed, my body isn't metabolizing food the way it would be if I was healthy.
Right.
So I just need to get myself back into out of a deficiency that I've been in, move from deficiency to proficiency.
Mhm.
And then the body will come back into balance.
Right.
Like that's what I need to do.
Okay. Yeah. And well, to another point too, one of the things that I also think is interesting, right, is we're talking today kind of the symbiosis of men and women with nature. And not necessarily saying to you, but I also have noticed a lot of times our lack of sleep, right, is our energy output, and understanding not just the energy output that we have, but also exactly are we moving in line with how nature is intended. And the reason why I bring that up is I don't know if you know, have you heard of Goda by chance? It's like a training method. It's like a basically, okay. So long story short, it's this company that I've actually just been recently certified in, and I bring this up because I think you might find this interesting. They basically talk about understanding the sacred geometry of the body. They talk about the sacred the math of the body and the spirals of the body, and that the way we've been kind of trained and taught to move has become what they call cadaver science, which isn't how nature flows. And that majority of our training today is becoming what they would consider front chain dominant. They're talking the way people are standing, the way we're positioning our feet. A lot of it has to do with the feet, and understanding that what you're doing and how we move isn't how babies are inherently taught to move, how indigenous tribes are meant to move and how they move. And we can see it on slow motion video. And ultimately what's happening is when you get that functional aspect of the body out of line with nature, what then that's doing hormonally, what that's doing to your metabolic rate, what's that's doing to just again how your body's moving, how your body's helping the process of blood flow, oscillation of the heart. So it's all those components too, because again, talking back to Victor Schauberger, you're creating these spirals, understanding that natural flow. And so for me, something I find interesting is people moving is still moving, and that's great, and it's getting that energy output. But if we're doing it on a foundation that isn't in line with nature, is that, this is just a question, is that really efficient? Is that, or rather proficient? And is that, so that, and that's just something that I think is interesting, and at least from my studies now in kind of growing from it and looking differently, how much I visually can observe these kind of destructive patterns in everyday people's life. And these are also people who work out all the time going, I work out, I move, but I still, again, I feel lethargic. I don't feel vibrant. I don't feel an energetic rush, maybe when they first start, but as time goes on, they're like, oh, I feel pain. I feel this, I feel that. And you start going, well, and for most people going, well, you're moving, you're doing on paper everything right, but it's not, we're a lot of times we're not looking at the foundation of it all. And that's why I was saying, I didn't know if maybe, and I don't know what you're doing for your fitness and your exercise or your energy outputs now, but I didn't know if maybe something that might be worth checking out.